Everybody, welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's program with artist Judy Baca and art historian Anna Indych-López. Tonight's talk is co-presented with the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, who have recently published a new book on the work of Judy Baca, authored by Dr. Indych-López. Judy Baca may be best known for the Great Wall of Los Angeles, a vibrant 2,740-foot mural in Los Angeles that presents an alternative history of California, one that focuses on the contributions of marginalized and underrepresented communities. The mural is emblematic of Baca's pioneering approach to creating public work, a process in which members of the community are essential contributors to the conception and realization of the project. In the new book, Anna Indych-López explores Baca's body of work, from early murals painted with local gang members in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of LA to more recently commissioned works. She looks in depth at the Great Wall and considers the artist's ongoing work with a nonprofit group Baca founded in 1976 called the Social and Public Art Resource Center, also known as SPARC, in Venice, California. Throughout the book, Indych-López assesses what she calls Baca's public art of contestation and discusses how ideas of collaboration and authorship and issues of race, class, and gender have influenced and sustained Baca's art practice. So tonight we are very pleased to have the two of them here in conversation. And after the talk, I want to invite you all to come to the lobby for coffee, tea, and cookies, and we'll have copies of the new book for sale, and I'm sure that Judy and Anna will be happy to sign them for you. Before we get started, I want to remind you to please silence your cell phones and note that video and audio recording are not permitted in the theater, but we will videotape this and make it available so you can share it with your friends and colleagues. And now I'm just going to give you a brief background for each of them, and then we'll start. Judy Baca is a painter and muralist, monument builder, and scholar who's been teaching art in the University of California system since 1984. She was the founder of the first City of Los Angeles mural program in 1974, which evolved into the community arts organization SPARC. She continues to serve as its artistic director and focuses her creative energy on the UCLA SPARC Digital Mural Lab, employing digital technology to create social justice art. Her public arts initiatives reflect the lives and concerns of populations that have been historically disenfranchised, including women, the working poor, youth, the elderly, LGBT, and immigrant communities. Throughout Los Angeles, and increasingly in national and international venues, Baca's projects have often been created in impoverished neighborhoods that have been revitalized and energized by the attention these works have brought and the excitement they've generated. Underlying all of Baca and SPARC's activities is the profound conviction that the voices of disenfranchised communities need to be heard, and that is essential to the preservation of a vital commons in a healthy civil society. Dr. Anna Indych-López is a professor of the humanities and the arts at the City College of New York and a professor of Latin American and Latino art at the Graduate Center at CUNY. She's the author of Muralism Without Walls, Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros in the United States, 1927 to 1940, and Diego Rivera, Murals for the Museum of Modern Art. Her new book on Judy Baca has garnered several awards from the 2018 Independent Publisher Book Awards and the International Latino Book Awards. So now, without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Judy Baca and Anna Indych-López.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Allison and Giannini, for hosting us here today. I also want to thank everyone at UCLA, Chicano Studies Research Center. This book is part of a series called A Ver, which is incredibly important in terms of redressing the lacuna on the literature on Latino art. And so I just want to thank them. And I want to thank Judy for being here. And this is kind of bittersweet because it's the last conversation we have on the docket right now. We've done a couple of these. But it's also great to be here because you've given 32 years to UCLA. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I think it's great that we're able to have this conversation here. So maybe we can talk later a little bit about your teaching here at UCLA. Okay. So I wanted to talk about the book and your work over the past 50 years. And one of the struggles that I had as an author confronting your work was dealing with the Great Wall, which is something that...
It was a problem for me, too.
Yeah. So the book is not intended to be about the Great Wall, but of course it features heavily in the book. It kind of is the bookend. I start with the Great Wall. I end with a chapter on the Great Wall. And it's how do you do something so canonical in a way? Justice. And so I had to grapple with how to talk about it. And I came up with my own version, and we had many discussions about it. And I think what I decided to do is take inspiration from the fact that it is ongoing, endless. There's potential there. It's unfinished, right? And there's a past, a present, and a future. And, it really became a model for what I call a public art of contestation. And part of that is the way in which you kind of defiantly reimagine Los Angeles. And so I thought that might be a good place for us to start, both in terms of the imagery, you as an artist, what does LA mean for this project for you, and how it developed. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. What does this project mean, or what does it mean to be an LA artist?
It's both, so whatever you want to talk about.
Well, I think Los Angeles is a particularly unique situation in terms of where an artist can work and live, primarily because we are a city of nations. I mean, we have something like 159 languages in our schools. We have these giant petri dishes from neighborhood to neighborhood that sort of bang up against each other, and where they bang, there are fusions. And I'm one of those people who grew up in a mixed neighborhood. I was born in Watts, and my mother, trying to get us to move out of the urban city, the inner city, moved us to a place in the San Fernando Valley called Pachuca. So it wasn't exactly a step up. It was a step to the side. And again, we were dealing with a community that was defined essentially for workers of the Lockheed aircraft industry and for minority workers. And it was defined by 4 landing fields that covered that area. So I grew up in a place that was of this mixed race of basically contested territories. It was the site of the Pachuca air crash, which some of you may know through the biography of Richie Valens. Ricardo Valenzuela, who was a classmate of mine. Cheech Marin was a classmate of mine. I mean, we were Valley people. We came out of the Valley. And Los Angeles provided me a rich place in which to understand myself as a Chicana. And I think what is profoundly being a Chicana is walking on the razor's edge between cultures and beginning to understand what it means to be of mixed race. Essentially, being Chicana, you're mestiza, and to be of multiple places at once, and to not be from the other side, essentially, because my mother was born on this side, so I'm second generation. And also to deal with a city that had a very uneasy relationship with us. Couldn't stand the fact that we were Spanish-speaking children, so I went through the school system that decided that I couldn't speak Spanish in school. In the 1950s, you were punished for doing that. English only was happening at that time. And when I approached the Great Wall provided me an opportunity in the San Fernando Valley, in a place that was not converted, was not speaking to the converted, to create a story that essentially is not the alternate history. It is the history of the United States. It is the history that includes all these diverse people. And what I like to say today, in this particular moment we're living, it is the only wall that should be built.
So part of the radicality of you doing that at that time, you were critiqued for not doing solely a kind of Chicanx or Chicano version of LA. But what you're saying is that you dug deep into your kind of identity to then be able to show this kind of perspective of history from the perspective of queers, minorities, people of color, precisely because of your position as an LA Chicana artist. So then how was it working with the youth, and how do you think that played out with the mural makers?
Through the Great Wall was, well, the truth was that in 1976, when I began this project, there was no ethnic studies. So I couldn't go to the shelves of our library and pull down African American history, pull down Chicano history, look at authored works that today are available. At that time, there was no Howard Zinn, in which we were looking at the people's history of America. It was first source materials. I had to go to first source.
You had to do the research.
I had to do research to begin to find, so what was the story? What was happening to African Americans in the 1920s? What was the central aspect of their lives? What was happening to indigenous people? And so as I began that research, it was overwhelming. It began to be just a barrage of information that was unknown to me. All of my studies in the university had not brought me any of that information. I had, classic American history, so I couldn't see any place where we were represented in terms of, the large population of color. And so I started to pull all this information together, and it came largely through magazines and films and, individual scholars who were doing research. And therefore, it became a giant educational project. And what I understood was that part of the problem for youth, in terms of their sense of self-esteem and their worth, was that they didn't really know what their families had contributed to the building of a nation. They knew, for example, that they were considered to be problematic, in some of these neighborhoods, in Pacoima in particular. They were defined by territories and place, and there were struggles between African American and Latino, for example. But they didn't really understand, that their families came over on the Mayflower, or that they founded the first bank, or that they, all those kinds of things that I saw from some of my more privileged white friends. And I thought, well, we made contributions. What were those contributions? Could we find those stories, those amazing stories of people's building of the country, because we know that they did it. So I began with my own family story. I traced my grandfather running from Pancho Villa during the Revolution.
And you told them about it? Or because your personal story is not in the wall, right?
No, it's not. It doesn't actually appear in my work until much later, right?
Much later. Yeah.
Much later. But I began to see that if I could find that story, then they could find theirs. And I mean, I had kids bringing in land grants, copies of land grants that gave them pieces of Griffith Park, and them saying, "Is this possible? We own Griffith Park." Right? I said, "Yeah, you probably did own. Your family probably did own Griffith Park." And so, as we began to do this recovery, it began to made the young people understand who they were and what they had contributed. And I felt that if, for example, Native American, Latinos, or Chicanos, and African American kids could begin to value each other's history, they would value each other. Mm-hmm. That they would begin to see that, in a sense, they were the same. That they had all been neglected in the American story, and that they needed to respect those stories, and that then in so doing, they would transform their own sense of self.
Right, and so then also it's not just about recuperating the history, but then you also made them into cultural producers, right? In a town, right, surrounded by Hollywood and, derogatory images of African Americans and Latinos, but So they learned about their history, but then also became cultural producers by being on the wall and being mural makers. What do you think? What do you think what galvanized them? Because you often talk about kind of the energy down at the wall. What do you think it was for them?
Well, it's interesting. I have this privilege of living long enough to see them grow up into adults, and for them to have children of their own, and to come back and tell me what it meant, at that particular moment. I've had kids who said, well, once you said that I couldn't come back to the wall and work unless I stayed in school. Do you know that that's why I finished high school? I said, I don't even remember saying that to you, right? But obviously, I was searching desperately for something to get you to behave, right? So I think actually what I saw was that they created cross-race connections with one another, which are still they're still connected to this day, 30 years later for those first children. And that was not possible because our schools were pretty segregated, because people lived in different neighborhoods. And so coming together in the Great Wall was one sort of melting pot where they were working on something that they commonly held. In other words, I didn't put black children or teenagers on only that painting that section. I didn't put Chicanos only on the Chicano section. I mixed it so that they were painting each other's history and that they began to own each part of that. And I knew it was working when, one day when I came out and there was a Japanese artist working with a Chicano kid, and they both had sand pans on, and they were painting the Chinese railroad section. And I said, what are you guys doing? He said, we're building the railroad, right? And so what was happening is they were beginning to own that story. And it's a better story than Washington's wooden false teeth,
So,
Don't you think?
So a moment ago you talked about the fact that the mural was made in a place that's not speaking to the converted, and I think that's often not acknowledged in the literature on the Great Wall. No. The fact that the youth are being bussed into the San Fernando Valley, into this community. Mm-hmm. Do you remember reactions from the community?
Oh, yes, very well. The first years that we were out, the first time we came out, I had to hold public meetings because there was concern in the local neighborhood, which was essentially a historic Jewish community, but a very conservative one. I mean, not the kind of liberal Jewish community that we have in other parts of town. This was a white flight area. People moved out of the inner city into the San Fernando Valley to create a suburban region where they could get away from essentially people of color and what they considered more crime-laden areas. And all of a sudden, there were all these kids of color coming in, 80 of them in the first year. And all of them had to have been arrested once to be on the production. And they ranged from truancy to attempted murder. And it was pretty hard for me to say in a public meeting, these are really nice kids, I was just trying to get them to behave and stay in seats and, do normal human behavior in a public setting. They were wild. And I actually enjoyed that about them. I enjoyed the fact that they were filled with energy, that energy, if directed, could be an incredible engine for production and for work. And so at the first meetings, the police came and said, we're going to have a crime rate, we're going to raise the crime rate, these people coming in here are going to invade your neighborhood, they're going to steal your cars and your hubcaps, and there's going to be a lot of problems. And I remember sitting through the meeting and listening to all this stuff that was really getting me more and more upset. And being younger and less seasoned, I was prone to outbursts. And so I did one of the Baca outbursts. I jumped up and started screaming and saying, I guarantee you the crime rate will go down. And I don't know what I was saying. I was like... But I realized that the thought in the back of my head was that if I took everybody who had been arrested from that region, it probably would go down. Because they were busy, they had a job, right? And they were not going to be running around during the day stealing hubcaps. So, in fact, we did drop the crime rate in that region. And we controlled their activities coming in and out of the site. So, so while we had this resistance, by the second time we came back to the site, the public was different. The people were different. And I remember this guy who would just be what my mother would call a redneck, you know, who came up to the site, a person who was obviously not terribly disposed to like all these kids of color. And the kids were interviewing because that year they got a hold of video cameras and they were videoing the public. So they were interviewing this guy and they said, well, what do you think about our project here? And the guy said, well, I don't know, you know. I just got to tell you one thing I can see. You guys work so damn hard out here. You're sweating. You're out here in the sun. And he said, I really admire hard work. And so what was happening was that this gentleman from across the street could begin to see that these kids were actually earning their money. They were out of trouble. And he became a supporter because he could see the hard work. And pretty soon, the neighbors were bringing us fruit, and they were bringing us cookies and lemonade because they thought we were going to die in the sun, which we were. Of course, it was unbearable out there, like sometimes 110 degrees. I mean, literally, we had to hose ourselves down to be able to stand out there. Anybody who's been on the Great Wall knows that experience. It's pretty rough. And increasingly, they loved the kids, and they made relationship with those kids.
So I think it's important to point out, like you just did a moment ago, that the kids were being paid, right? Because often the Great Wall is talked about as a kind of predecessor for social practice. And I think for you it was always very important that the people on the cruise were getting paid. And that kind of distinguishes your model of public art than from some others. But I want to talk about this idea of collaboration, participation, and collectivity, but also your kind of unique take on it in terms of asserting aesthetic control. You want to talk about that in the system that you came up with?
Well, there's a lot of aspects to the notion of collaboration and how one goes about, producing large-scale works. I mean, there are the historic methods. I mean, the methods that were done in, Renaissance workshops and the kind of male models of the master artists with the sort of minions who were carrying out those ideas. And I was really interested in what could be a woman's model, what could be a feminist model of how would you create a large-scale work. I mean, and this has actually been something that I've been criticized for. Is this really your work? You've worked with so many different people. Where's your hand? I've actually had historians looking at something and saying, where did you actually paint? They're looking for where my hand went and where did it end? Where did it begin and where did it end?
Or the whole project being disparaged as kind of kiddie art.
It's kiddie art, yeah. So Judy's making kiddie art. And that was actually some of my peers, other Chicano artists who said things like that. I said my thought was that if you cannot tell where my hand begins and ends, then I'm successful. If you see it's seamless and you can't tell where a kid painted and where I painted and where somebody else painted, then we are successful. And the other part of it was like the interpretation of history, we all know, is something that is a matter of choice. I mean, what do you choose? What story do you tell? Whose story gets remembered? What story gets repeated? And how does that become the American story? So what I was really fascinated by was how would people interpret it through a different set of prisms, like your age, for example. Did you see a particular event differently at a certain age? What about your immigration status? How do you see history from the fact that you're undocumented, or that your family just came, or that your family has been here 2 generations, or 3? Or how do you see this piece of history? What should you include by virtue of your economic status? I mean,
so the imagery evolved out of kind of workshop sessions where you talked as a collective to come up with imagery.
Right.
And then workshopped through designs of how to then visualize or codify those ideas.
Right.
And then in terms of design,
when the piece comes down to the final production. And I just had this recent review of every single drawing from the Great Wall. And it's been this sort of a big education for me, because I'm like looking back at work now done, some of it 30 years ago. And as I'm looking through that, I can see a kind of consistency of the way the production has gone, you know, from conceptualization in a large group. So there might be historians coming in to speak to us, and there are little thumbnails going on because we're making jokes about what they're saying, you know, like they're saying, Chavez Ravine is coming, Chavez Ravine is being taken over, and the oldest town, which was like Sonora Town, the beginning of Los Angeles, was taken over by Chavez Ravine, or by the Dodger Stadium, and Dodger Stadium was moved into Chavez Ravine. So we were playing around, and I drew a little spaceship coming down into a community, and it was kind of silly. But then all the other people in the room said, "That's a good idea. Let's put a spaceship coming down in Chavez."
It's one of the most famous panels.
It's one of the most famous panels, right? So we were doing interpretation of little thumbnails, and then from there, actually conceptualizing and refining and creating a final drawing. But if I could give you a visual, think of a pyramid reversed, the biggest outreach for the most information, and then it narrowing down as it comes to the final drawing, where I'm refining the drawing and making it work compositionally. But the reach is very large. I'm really interested in what the child will say about this. I'm interested in what the older person will say. I'm interested in all the different ranges of people by their status in the world. And always, when somebody new comes in, they'll say, "You forgot the LGBT people," or "You forgot, you know, what a senior might think of this." And then I go, then I'm actually tweaking the inclusion of another group of people.
So part of what I try to do in the book is really look closely at the aesthetics of the murals, because part of what gets lost in the conversation is to really talk about the forms and the ways in which, in your work, there's a lot of attention to form as a way to reinforce the ideas of social justice and multi-ethnic history that you're trying to communicate. I mean, this is a very well-known image of Rosie the Riveter. It comes out of vernacular culture, comics, Chicano art, feminist art history. And then to look at the panels all together and to try to look at what you talk about, this idea of a kind of seamless hand in a way. And it was just really enlightening to be able to think about the use of form. And so to think about the work being innovative, not just as a kind of form of public art, but that also innovates with aesthetics. And we've had so many conversations. You're so particular about color. Judy color checked every single image in the book. It's something that's so profoundly important to her. And that's often lost in the conversation. And so I want you to talk a little bit more about kind of your aesthetic influences and how you see that playing out in your work and in the Great Wall.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, it's hard to understand scale. When you're looking at Rosie the Riveter, for example, my head falls below her sleeve when I'm standing alongside of that. That gives you an idea. My full-scale body standing next to this piece.
They're 13 feet tall? The panels are 13 feet tall?
The panels are 13 feet, so I am about, maybe just where the orange is in the bottom sleeve. That's where my head will be. Because I can recall what it was like painting into it, those areas. So the scale is massive. The other thing is that it's read from 70 feet away. So there's a reach of the Los Angeles flood control channel between it and the closest viewer. So it's painted in scale in which the detail painting is probably never under a 1-inch brush. It's big brushes. And also a lot of it is about the movement of the piece. So you're looking at kind of large gestures. If you think of it when you're painting, for those of you painters in the audience, if you're painting on a canvas, you're making a movement with your wrist to create an arch on a canvas. This is an arch on a lift over many feet. So in order to be able to see it from a distance, you're designing it, and then you're working with the designs in hand, and you're putting it up, and then you're running back 70 feet to look at it. The design elements are about creating a method of painting that naive hands can participate in. So how do you paint this? I mean, I wouldn't say that this method of painting would be what my easel paintings would look like. They're not the same. Mm-hmm. This method of painting is a method in which I can break everything down to 5 colors. It can be painted by blocked-in hands that if you can get the kid to put the paint in between lines, that's pretty good, right? Because that's a lot to ask of a kid, to keep his attention on something for a period of time, to fill the space, and then to actually get it to a secondary color and a third color, and then to bring a refining team that can bring it to the 5th color, and to bring up highlights and to create the finish. So we're working in various stages of the production, and we're also doing underpainting. So when the drawings go up on the wall, we have to put them into blue line very quickly if it rains, because we'll lose all the drawings that are in charcoal. We also have the problem of snow blindness or damage to our retinas because of the glare from the white. So we have to get all of that off as fast as possible so nobody goes blind. And we're putting washes to take that down. And then we're doing the base colors, and we're building it up in layers. And we're doing all of this in 9 weeks.
Yeah, the speed of it is incredible.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads to my next question, which is, what did you learn? What would you do differently? So this is a sketch for the proposed 1960s segment, and here is a model for the proposed Green Bridge, which will be the future of the Great Wall. But now that you're in this process, you restored the mural a couple of years ago, you're doing the Green Bridge, you're thinking about the future panels. Is there anything you would have done differently or will do differently? Or
I have to make this admission, which is that I'm always terrified to begin again, because I feel like I just got to match what I was able to do before. It's kind of a miracle that I was able to pull it off, and I'm afraid I won't be that good. I can't even match myself. And yet I do know things now that I didn't know then. And I can see, go back for a slide for a second. On the lunch counter section, this is about 60 to 70 feet of mural. And I know that, for example, to get a figure to actually be readable and powerful, that the woman who won't serve the people at the lunch counters, she's really the central aspect of this story. She's the one who says, no, you can't sit at this lunch counter, right? So she has to be at least half of the height of the piece for it to read. And then to try and get the sort of incredible figures who are sitting at the counter, and the stoicness, the kind of passivity that they have in terms of nonviolent resistance that they're communicating. Again, they have to be large figures. So I have reduced the numbers of figures in most panels. I've created larger scale for most of them. And I know a lot now also about how you punch colors so that I can take your eye and I can watch the way people look at things. And this is kind of funny too, because I have different levels of viewers. Like I used to take my stepfather down the mural to see the designs, and he was a factory worker and not very well educated. And I would take him along and say, "What do you see, Dad?" Right? And then he would tell me what he was seeing. And if he could read the pieces, that was one level of communication. I knew I had done it for the working class people of that region. Then I would ask somebody who was more of a scholar, or a person who was an art historian who understood the references I was making to other artists in terms of the use of like Jackson Pollock's sky, for example, or George O'Keeffe Mountain. then that would be another level. So I was making it for different levels of understanding. And that was always part of that process. And everything is in the drawings. There is no change on the wall, so everything has to be done really effectively in the drawings. The drawings are the very basis of the creative production of the wall. The execution at the site is the next part, and also the kids who are engaged in, having input into these into the drawings. They may not be able to draw the refined drawing, but they'll be there saying, "Oh, I really think you should include, the spaceship coming down." They'll have a sense of humor, and they'll have an insight that will help me figure out what should be there.
There's a lot of sense of humor in the mural.
It gets funnier, actually, because it gets sadder. I mean, the history of race in America is really horrifying. And in order to do that, you have to find a place in which you can show how we triumph over it and actually find your sense of humor about it, to have a triumph over something that is an egregious act.
I'm going to move on to a non-Great Wall work, a non-public work that's gotten a lot of attention recently. Las Tres Marias, which was made for the first ever Chicana art exhibit at the Women's Building, which was a very important place for you, very formative, and you talk a lot about the importance of it. And so I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the tension in this work, because this work is very much a kind of linchpin in the book for me. It comes at a very important part of the book. It really is the kind of jumping off point in a chapter I call Speaking Back, that really kind of defines what I call your public art of contestation. And so for me, it was very important to consider this work in the context in which it was originally made at the Women's Building, as being this first show of Chicana art and being a kind of representation of a non-white working class subject. And therefore, also in the recent exhibition in the Radical Art show that was here at the Hammer, one of the few works of that kind. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that tension, doing this work at the Women's Building at a place that was formative, but then also kind of, it being a work about kind of the erasure of the perspective of feminists of color, women of color, from the conversation of white middle class feminism.
Right. Well, this piece is it's a triptych, and you can't quite see in the photograph here. We don't have another one of it, do we?
Of the actual piece? No.
No. Okay. So
we have
actually
the performance.
Oh, okay, the performance. The back of this piece that you see of the.
It's hard to photograph. Yeah.
Yeah, it's three figures, or two figures. The Pachuca is me, and it's me in about 1975, 74, and yeah, and the back of the triptych is tuck and rolled, and the tuck and roll was a velvet a method of upholstering lowrider cars. Right? You can kind of see it in the corner, yeah. And my father was an upholsterer, and he did the tuck and roll for me. So it's the way the boys did the lowrider cars. They would do their fancy, buttons into the seats. I see people nodding their heads. They remember those incredible things, and they were pieces of art, really, essentially. So I did it like a lowrider car, and the center is a mirror, and the two figures, left and right, are two. They're girls that are 20 years apart. The Pachuca is really a figure that is less known than the Pachuco image that was sort of featured in Zoot Suit, and the play by Luis Valdez brought out the story of the Pachuco here in Los Angeles in the Zoot Suit riots that occurred on June 6, 1943. And the girl was less known, but she was a radical woman. I mean, she was a kind of wild woman. She ratted her hair up. She put razor blades in her hair, so that if somebody grabbed her in a street fight, they'd get their hands cut up. She rolled Marlboros into her sleeves. She wore these tight skirts, and she was really somebody not to mess with. It was like a facade to say, if you bother me, you got trouble, right? And I loved that character. I just loved her. I wanted to be her. I wasn't her. My cousin was. And my mother wouldn't let me be her. So I'm doing my cousin Esther here. And she was that person. And my mother sent me to Catholic schools just so I wouldn't be that person. And but it's interesting, the girl alongside of her is Flaca. And Flaca is, 20 years later, and she's got hush puppies, and she's wearing a version of the boys' khakis, and she doesn't have that restrictive tight skirt, so she can run, and but she's also a real character from my neighborhood. She's from Pachuca, and I brought the girls to the women's building to do a mural with me, which was the backdrop for this, and Mi Barrio Pachuca here. And the show was called Las Venas de la Mujer. And you can see a mirror, a vanity mirror. That's me standing in front of that installation that the girls did. I forgot to tell the girls that they couldn't paint anywhere but there. So they kind of hit the women's building. We had to spend 3 days cleaning up after they went into the bathroom and sprayed everywhere. You didn't say we couldn't do it. I said, okay, yeah, it's my fault. And anyway, the figure, she's acting up. She's shaved off her eyebrows. I don't recommend it because they don't grow back very easily. and ratted up her hair. And I came to the opening like this, and people didn't know it was me. They couldn't figure out it was me. But it was a performance in which I am transforming myself in the mirror into this Pachuca. And what I was playing with was this, in a sense, the transformation of these two girls in the 20-year period, because the feminist movement had occurred. The girls were starting to not dress, as restrictively as the Pachuca did. They were looking more like the boys in terms of the way they dressed. And I was looking at the creation of the character who was essentially doing the same thing. She was creating a facade in which she was a powerful person against a hostile world. And how she did that was by the way that she changed her look and made herself distinctive from what would be a white woman. And this was the first show that the Women's Building ever did of women of color.
So this is, quite different from the Great Wall and some of the other projects in terms of, I guess, medium. So there's an intimacy to the drawing. It's hard to tell from this picture, but it's smaller scale when you see it in person. People talk about it as life size, but it's a little bit under life size. And
you become the third Maria.
You become the third Maria. There's this, because you're standing in the mirror, so performance is part of the work. There is just a wonderful quality of draftsmanship. These are drawings, it's not a painting.
Right.
You really see your hand in the work. There's you in the work, it's self-portraiture, there's performance. These are, it's not things normally associated with Judy Baca until recently. Do you want to talk about that aspect?
It was a kind of a personal piece in the sense that I was toying with this identity, and the third Maria, what the choices as a young woman, it was like the virgin, the whore, or the mother, right? And I just thought it would be better to be the whore.
We'll leave it at that.
I don't know. I just thought, she would have more fun. I just didn't see myself as a mother, and I didn't see myself, as sort of like, going into the convent, and which was the other choice, of course. But it was like looking at those three figures and understanding who I wanted to be. This is a very early time in terms of me figuring out my own identity.
So I wanted to then talk about some later works that you have called political landscapes that deal with issues of the border and migration that I find to be incredibly important and incredibly timely now. This is at the Denver International Airport. This is an image of it in situ. If you ever have a chance to go to Denver, stop at the airport and look at this work. It's a must-see. It's kind of incredible that it's still there and they haven't taken it down, because I do think it's quite controversial. Caracen mural, Migration of the Golden People, about the migration of Central Americans. And then this mural that's at USC, and this is the sketch for it. Let me go back for a second, though. These two, both the Denver work and this one, are specifically deal with the issue of migration and borders. Do you want to talk about them before we go to USC?
Well, sure.
This one's actually not in the book, so...
This one's not in the book.
Yeah. This is one of my regrets. I just couldn't fit it in, so I'd love for you to talk about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is the first. If we go back for a second, let's start with this one. I think it's easier to kind of look at the sequence of this.
Oh, go to USC?
This is. They're both, in the sense, they're the memory of our land is a work in which I'm using landscape as the place to place the story, and it comes from the notion that all memory is embedded in the land. That where something occurs is somehow there and always remains there. And I think this is something that I got from the indigenous roots of my grandmother, who had this relationship to growing things and living things, and anything taken from the land had to be replaced. And so this was just very much natural to me. This is my grandfather on the right-hand side of this piece. That's Judy Baca. And this is the largest migration of Mexican people into the United States occurred during the Mexican Revolution. And this is in the Denver airport. It's part of my family's migration up the Santa Fe Trail through what I call the Alice Island of the Southwest, which is El Paso. And as people came through that passing, they had a choice to go into Juarez. And at that time, there was a war going on in Juarez. It was embattled. And so they kept going further north, and they ended up in this little town called La Junta, which was a junction, this small town on the Arkansas River facing Kansas, in the bitter, bitter cold near the Purgatory River. I mean, that gives you a whole description of hard scrabble life, which is where my mother was born. And in this region, the schools were segregated. Mexican people couldn't go into certain restaurants. My mother never was able to sit in the bottom floor of a movie theater. It was when this work was dedicated that I took her to sit in the movie theater for the very first time in her town in the bottom floor. And she said, well, we have to go up there. And I said, no, Mom, we're going to go and see Selena, and we're going to sit on the bottom floor. And so we sat on the bottom floor, and she was like really nervous about it. And she looked around, and then she leaned over to me and said, this is no big deal. Why did they keep us out of here for all these years? So, I mean, this is the story of this region. Colorado was particularly severe, and it still has this long history of this, sort of red state, and a history with Mexican people that is really, really checkered. And Corky Gonzalez is depicted in this as is my grandparents walking along as if they're walking on water. So what I'm doing is I'm countering the notion that immigrants are transforming, that they're a brown tide, that they're catastrophic to the landscape, that they bring bad things, that they are basically rapists and murderers, and that they are, in fact, transforming the Southwest. And so that was one of the very first stories that I told in terms of using landscape. So the landscape is painted. Some of the figures are digitally generated and then embedded in the piece. And my grandfather's choice was that he either was going to be a Chihuahuan miner, you can see the miner on the left-hand side of the piece, or he was going to be working in the railroad, or he was going to be in the fields. And he chose to work in the railroad, so you can see him, in the railroad. And it's an incredible moment in which Corky Gonzalez brings and Cesar Chavez meet to bring the grape boycott to Colorado, so that there's that emotion.
So in these works too, in these kind of series, part of also what you do is like you make visible some of the violence and conflict that have been erased from histories. And that's what the origins of the Denver mural are actually this mural at USC in 1996.
Right.
So here, this is the actual mural that
Right.
you see now when you go to USC. This is the drawing, there's a sketch for it. And what this sketch does is documents the controversy that erupted when you submitted the sketch to the board at USC. And you basically turned it into a kind of conceptual artwork. And for me, this is also a kind of linchpin in the book. And you can't read the text, so I wanted to highlight some of the wit, the writing in the drawing. Because what Judy did is she was having a conversation with the president, who was kind of upset with this submission, upset with the drawing. And she documented the conversation with the president on this drawing. And so there was a figure hanging from the bridge. And it was a representation of a lynching from the 1890s. And so the president says, "This is absolutely unacceptable." And Judy says, "I agree, but the fact is accurate." And then the president says, in terms of the overall vision, generally, Judy, we believe that this mural is not understandable to an Anglo audience and is too negative. The history you represent is depressing. Judy, I was invited to make a Chicana Latino-themed mural and to work with Latino students to conceptualize the imagery. I have done that. Besides, I did not make the history. I just paint it. So in this case, you kind of turn a controversy into this kind of witty conceptual work. But controversy is kind of a part of making work like this.
Why is the goddess so angry?
Why is the goddess so angry?
Somebody hammered the border in her back. I was recording it as I was just writing it down as they were talking. There were 5 people on the phone, and the piece had already been approved by their committee, and it was like the last minute trying to intimidate me to remove some of the content.
There's actually a place in the drawing, I think, that says SOS, where you're like asking for help. You're like, get me out of here.
I had kind of it was kind of I was being sarcastic and a little bit sardonic because I realized that the Annenbergs were making a movie about this piece, and they were not going to censor it on film. So I knew that I could get away with it. I mean, it was going to be, if I was all alone in this, I probably would have lost the piece for what I just did, what I did on them.
So we're running out of time, so I just want to get to the aspect of the digital and your latest work. This is from a couple of years ago already, but you're increasingly working in a more digital way.
Right, combination of painted and digital.
How has digital furthered your concept of collaboration? Has it helped? Is it distinct? How do you see this in your trajectory?
Well, I just feel like the technology has advanced in such a way that it's providing us answers to some of the problems that we have had as muralists. One of our outstanding problem is censorship. Another problem is the
meaning because you can replicate.
Well, because the work can be removed. Right now, the Denver piece is going to be removed from the central hall, the grand hall. And I just met with them, and they are...
Why is it being removed?
Well, because actually the way that the security area was created, it makes it easy for you to get your guns off a ski rack and stand above the whole security and kill everybody in security. So they're having to change the whole grand hall of the Jepson terminal. But I think in my discussions with them, talking about how important this piece was to to the Latinos of Denver, that they will put it back into a segment of the grand hall. I mean, that's what I'm negotiating right now. And that means it can be remade, the size can be changed. If something is destroyed, it can be moved and reproduced. And that's happened to so many of our historic murals that were done in ethnic communities. They've been destroyed and lost. So the digital process gives us a capacity to create a digital file and reproduce the work and move it. The other thing is that all that first source material that we have used and we made drawings from, now in some cases can be actually put into the mural. And in this piece, for example, behind Robert Kennedy's head, there's a little image of Julio Romero as a photograph of him. And Julio just passed, and he got to see this just before he died. He was the one that was cradling Kennedy when he was dying. So I could actually use a real photograph of that person. So the real photographs actually go into the piece as well as the hand-painted work. So it's a combination of both the things that you make up in your head, but also photographic materials that are documentations of one-time moments in history. So I actually really think the digital process has advanced the form. Also, because increasingly people can't conceive of things, they can't conceptualize, I can actually put something on a wall and show you what it looks like. I can walk you around it digitally in a computer, and you can see it before it goes up, particularly with the scale. This is Tiny Ripples of Hope in the Robert F. Kennedy Learning Center, where these two murals face each other across the ballroom where he died, where he just gave his last speech after he was, he'd won the primary and was moving on, running for the President of the United States, and then was killed in the kitchen and cradled by Julio Romero at the last moment. So there you can see the scale of this image.
And so you're at the point where you're also now painting digitally. You're conceiving of sketches, right?
Yes, I'm doing both. I can actually, today, I can paint on screen and make a mark across the screen that can be a few inches, and it will be 10 feet on the wall. So in other words, the mural itself can be produced with digital styluses. I can tell it to paint dry brush, to paint wet, to liken the kind of brush I would use in real time. And then I can send it to print, and it can print it full scale, and you will not know that I did not paint it by hand. And not only that, I could replicate it and put it in 5 cities.
And you're printing it yourself.
We now can print 6 feet across by 40 or 50 feet. We really, there are printers now that are 16 feet high, which means that you can make really huge scale. We have yet to get one of those printers, like $1 million for one of those incredible printers. But they now exist, and the quality of the print is such that the pixels are disappeared, and the quality of the printing is amazing. And the lifespan of the ink is really good now, too.
So Judy's still on the scaffold. She's still at it, making murals. And these are sketches of a new project that I heard you've just recently finished.
Well, you're looking at a mock-up, the beginning of a series of 8 murals in the Central Valley that tell the story of what is happening to farm workers right now. We're doing 8 pieces up the 90 freeway in the Central Valley and telling the stories of these small towns where mostly farm workers live, like Lamont is a tiny little town. And Manuela here is, her hands are turning into magical hands. She has since been painted, but these are just photographic references. And in the background, you're seeing her son nearly dying of lymphoma in the hospital bed, and him actually transforming as he comes out of the hospital bed and becomes a runner again. The doctors gave up on him, and Manuela, not speaking any English and not having any health care, actually mounted a huge campaign to save his life. So this is a great story of an individual farm-working woman, a campesina, who is now teaching people all over the valley how to fight for the well-being of their families. On the left side is an immigrant worker who is holding up his phone to show the pesticides, the EPA removal of the bans on certain pesticides. The pesticides are going out over the farm workers in the fields. This is documentation of this happening today. And while we were working on this and organizing in each of these small towns, an 18-year-old girl who was pregnant died in 118-degree weather outside, without water and without shade and the kinds of conditions that we thought were over in California. They're not over. And so he is holding up a cell phone and he's documenting what is occurring. Well, he has to keep doing his job. And this is now a painted work. It's now a big painting. And they're 10 feet tall by 20 feet wide. And they're being installed in each of these small towns. This one here is going to Bakersfield. This one on the right is going to Lamont, a tiny little town in the Central Valley. So watch for 8 of them. They're pretty amazing on teenage pregnancy, on diabetes problems in the Oaxacan community, on healthcare systems that are being devised, on homelessness along the Sacramento River, all the story of what's happening in terms of social justice work that we need to attend to. Our next series, this next year, is for the abolishment of ICE. There'll be 5 maestros working on that topic, and I'm really excited to see these amazing artists come together in the Digital Lab to do those works.
I think we're at a time now where we really need an artist like Judy to continue working. Thank you, Judy. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we're happy to answer questions if you have any.
Yes.
Wait up for the microphone, please.
Who are the 5 artists that are going to work on that?
So far, we have a confirmation from Amalia Mesa-Baines, who is the MacArthur genius, and because we're doing digital print, and she has some health challenges, she can sit at a computer and make a giant scale mural. Johanna Pothig, who is one of the great women muralists in the United States, who has produced, you'll know her from the Golden Hands on Broadway downtown, the Octavio Paz poem and the Golden Hands, that she'll be coming down to work with us. Let's see who else. Esther Hernandez, who she's known for her work with farm workers, is also agreed. So we're still waiting for the responses from the others. So I think it's going to be an incredible. The days in the lab are going to be quite exciting. Great conversations among a series of artists that will be working on this.
That needs to be documented.
Huh?
That needs to be documented.
Yes, we also just the fact that we can dream of abolishing ICE is the most important piece of work. We're working with Endelon as well, immigrant rights organization. Yes.
Judy, it's a great pleasure to be here and to meet you. I think your work is so important because it's important to know your history in order to be able to move forward and to have a vision and be productive. A couple questions is, was it your original intention to be a muralist? How have your murals impacted the youth, aside from them, coming to acknowledge, that they have a history? Has there been other epiphanies that you've had on the youth? And without, I guess, being too political, what further things would you like to see aside from like today's current issues, like maybe for you for the future?
Thank you. Those are great questions. I was a muralist from the beginning. And the reason was that there wasn't really a place for me to go. I didn't know of a gallery that would take a Chicana artist. I didn't see anybody who was successful at that. But I did see a lot of work on the street. I saw a lot of writing on the street. And I saw kids writing and creating roll calls of their names. And then I saw them starting to make images. You know, they'd write white fence, and then they'd make a little picket fence, right? And or there'd be some crazy little character who would sort of depict one of the homeboys. And I thought, wow, they're just steps away from making something that articulates who they are. You know, soy flaco, and then there'd be this skinny little guy, you know, like a drawing of a skinny little guy. And I thought if they actually went further, they could make more articulate statements that would actually help the movement for at that point, civil rights. I was walking out of the university in 1969. So I was interested in how my hands, trained to do something useless, you know, I thought I was useless. I became an artist, and you know, we were in the middle of a struggle for civil rights. How could those hands be useful in changing things? And because I didn't see how I could become one of those 1% of artists in the world. In fact, probably, I don't know, what is the percentage of women that are successful painters? And yet, I was compelled to be an artist. I couldn't change that. So I figured, okay, I'll sell the teaching skills. I'm pretty good at that. And I will also do this work in this way, and that it could be transformative. And the second part of your question was, how did it impact the kids? The things that I've learned from them over the years is that they understood themselves in relationship to other races in a way that really transformed their ideas about race and about who they were with one another. And those formed long-term relationships, and then they became ambassadors of those ideas that people needed to touch across these spaces and these divisions, which increasingly, as in the world that we're living in, we can see is an essential problem, that we don't have ways to make those connections between ourselves. So much so that people can have ideas that are so erroneous about segments of the population that they can decide to put a ban on Muslims, that you can make a ban on stop children and families at the border and put babies in cages. Where does those ideas and that possibility come from? If it isn't essentially that we don't understand one another on the most basic level. So I think that's probably the best thing that I did with the kids, and I think the best thing that they learned. And of course, some of them became artists. Some of them became teachers. Some of them became, I've got a kid who's a studio painter. I got another one who makes giant sculptures, and he's working all over the world. In Dubai, building these theme parks, and he worked with me when he was 14, and he's quite a successful artist. I mean, there are people who are artists. I wasn't so enamored with the idea of making artists because I didn't want them to struggle to make a living. I wanted them to figure out something that was easier. But I saw how they applied those skills and transformed their lives. And what do I think we need to do in the future? I think we have to reintegrate ourselves as artists, as citizens. We have to see artists as a vital part of citizens in the United States and integrate them into every aspect of decision making. We need to get artists, on city councils. We need to get artists in the Board of Education. We need to get artists in places where we can just, drop a bomb on an idea that they have that's not making it, right? To have a creative solution that might be a different view. And okay, so maybe we'll take you off and it'll take you 10 more minutes in your discussion because we're diverting the story. But sometimes the diversion of a story is a path that you really need to take so you have a different idea. That's one of the things I think we need to do, and I think all of us need to be thinking very seriously about how we can contribute to change, because we all have to be part of it. And one of the major things, I think, is that we all have to begin to deal with climate change, or we're not going to have an Earth. That's where I'm going next. That crazy? What did they give us, 12 years? I got 12 years.
Hi, Judith.
Hi.
I saw in your work how defined the hands are in so many of the people that you pictured there. I mean, you talk about that.
I'm sorry, can you say again? I missed it.
The hands,
Yes.
and just talk about what that means to you.
Are you talking about the RFK work?
All the work.
Oh.
In all the work of all the features, the hands are very vibrant. They're very present.
Well, yes, in the Kennedy piece, Tiny Ripples of Hope is the whole bottom of it is hands. And they're actually distinct hands of real people, holding up Robert Kennedy's ideas, because he basically had been reading Siddhartha when he was killed. He had gone through this transformation after his brother was murdered, and he was really looking at leadership in an entirely different way. So I use the hands as a symbol of labor, of what you do with your work life, how that can be contributing to the larger good of the world. How do you do that? The hands are a great symbol for that. People understand that. And also they tell you the range. I mean, you look at the hands of an indigenous person. They're distinct and completely clear of that they are indigenous hands. The same with body shapes. So I love figurative work. Although major museums have said we can't give you a show because we don't show figurative work. Someday they're going to have to change that idea. I'm hoping that I'll work on that because I think figurative work has a place in communicating in a broad range of people to those people who are less educated and less involved in abstracted ideas. Not that I was trained as a minimalist painter and the gestural mark, and as a colorist. All of those things are useful to me in the creation of figurative work. But I'm interested to reach a very broad audience. And it's not just an audience of my peers or scholars.
One more question?
Get Anna's book. It's a cool book.
Yeah, I have a question to kind of bring us back to the kind of political aspect, part of which came out in the USC mural, because we think of your work in terms of the incredible power of it as a public kind of artistic statement, the fact that it's a product of collaboration, and that there's a kind of set of political ideals as well as artistic ideas that are kind of being worked out. But what's always intrigued me is there's that other element of your work, which is about political survival. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about, say, the beginning of the mural program. Because what intrigues me is that you had to find and understand and work with the political forces within the city of LA and to find support through the deputy mayor. But the part that I didn't know until you told me is that somebody tried to take all of that away from you the second you put it into place, and that was Millard Sheets. And can you just say a little bit about navigating that and pushing back, and how do you not just have a good idea and good impulses, but make sure that you get to do it?
Well, I think, John, you're right, but not just once, every time. So in other words, did they try to take it away? They tried to take it away practically every day, or to make it disappear the moment something became uncomfortable. All we really, you just think of the Hannity and all of the radio stations in one series of radio announcements which are passed between the right wing. They were able to, within just 4 to 5 days, set unleash a whole group of right-wing haters on my piece in Baldwin Park. They did it in a remarkable period of time. And they marched against the monument, demanding that the city of Baldwin Park take down a rather benign piece that was a metro rail station. And if they didn't take it down, they were going to cost that city hundreds of thousands of dollars by virtue of marching on it, and then the city having to protect those 40 marchers or 30 marchers that were, Save Our State, the Minutemen, who were anti-immigrant forces, because I dared to put on the side of an arch that I built that said, Gloria Ansel-Duell's statement, "This land was Mexican once, was Indian always, and will be again," right? So her little statement is what incited them, right? And they're very, very, today I think we're looking at, I just received information this morning from a group in San Francisco, Clarion Alley and Balmy Alley, in which the MAGA people, which is the Make America Great Again, and they were ladies, went out and took every figure in a mural that was just completed and put baseball caps with Make America Great on the front of those faces, blocking out these leaders. So now when you're looking at the war going on in the street in terms of graffiti and damaging. I'm waging a war right now, and I hate to use the word war, but I am fighting with these men who are destroying a woman runner on the Harbor Freeway across her entire body so that her legs, first it was just keeping her legs from stepping out of the wall, and now it's the entire figure. And that is misogyny. It's a misogynist statement, it's clear, and the Caltrans does not maintain the Olympic murals that were sponsored by the Olympic Organizing Committee. Assaults, yes, every minute of every day. And what that means is that you develop this sort of resiliency. You expect that if there's a wind blowing in the forest, that the trees bend with it, and that you have to return to an upright position. You bend with it, and you come back to an upright position. And in every case, you try to find a way to rise above it and to take the higher road. And that isn't always easy, because truly, sometimes I just want to kill somebody. I mean, don't give me a gun, right? I just am not that evolved. I have to figure out how to transform that in myself. And that's really what we're all trying to do. Transform that inside of yourself, that hating inside of yourself. Because I don't want to become what I despise. And as far as the political, that's far easier than the public at large that are doing these terrible things to each other right now. Politicians have buttons. They all have the same buttons. How do they look in public? How is it going to seem in terms of their political agenda? And if you can make it fit with their idea of who they are, then you can get them to come with you. And some people actually can be convinced by what is good. These kids will get jobs. This will transform this park or this neighborhood. You can make that case. But increasingly, that's more difficult. Increasingly, they're not convinced by the public good. They're convinced in what's in it for me. And so you have to go through that process and say, what could he get out of this that would be good for him? And a him is mostly the case, right? How can he feel good about doing this with us? Can he fund us, and how will that be good for the vision of who he is? And in some cases, it's fruitless. It's very difficult. The citywide mural program, funded in 1974, was defunded in its first year because of a radio station right-wing talking about controversy in terms of a mural. We got it refunded. Then it was defunded again, right? And every time it was the same thing, controversy. But public art, at its very basis, is controversial. It always will be. You're not going to be able to please every single person who sees it. And what people should do, if they're actually administrators and they run city programs, they should say, we're going to run a program that's going to be controversial, and we're going to have to, let's tighten up the screws so our ship doesn't fall apart, and get ready to ride the wave. And if they would do that, then we would really have good arts people in the world. But mostly, we have cowards in that area as well. So I'm for less cowardly behavior. Does that help? Does that get it?
Should we sign some books?
Yeah, we'll sign some books. We'll sign some books. Thank you all
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everyone.